Hey everybody, this is Dave from Ancient Amnesia. I'm sitting here with Josh, the admin and the creator of the webpage on Facebook. And we're going to talk about something really shocking today. It's an electrifying subject. We know you won't find it revolting. And that would be the electric universe theory as proposed by Thunderbolts and a variety of other people. So I know Josh has been reading up on it, and so have I. A lot of you might even know more about this than we do. But we're going to kind of discuss some of the aspects that we find interesting about it. And we're going to hit a few bases that people might not expect talking about electrical universes. You might be thinking there's a little spirituality involved, and we'll get in there. But until then, I think the best thing we can do here is take our sunglasses off and enjoy that sun at full volume. So, Josh, what do you think? What's your idea on the synopsis of electrical universe theory? What does it say to you right away? Like, what does it mean?
It really shocked me, Dave, when I was getting the information.
Oh, no.
I was electrified by the information that I found. It was enlightening. It was bright. It was.
Oh my God.
No, I knew a little bit about it. I've watched the Thunderbolt stuff. I've read some David Talbot stuff. I've read Emanuel Velikovsky's work, and all very convincing and really, really amazing stuff. But as I started to kind of look at other fields that support the evidence, it started to kind of be surprising to me that this was even a theory. I mean, there's a lot of it that just is validated by science. It's not theoretical at all. So there's some smaller aspects of the universe theory that have yet to be proven. But there's a lot of evidence that those particular aspects are true and will be. And even if they're not, it still doesn't take away from, a large critical mass of the what's called theory of it being actually true. So, that was one of the most kind of interesting things I got out of just going back into the information and reading it. When we look at the cosmos and in conventional cosmology, we've been using optical telescopes to find our information. So they give us a certain view of reality, and we've looked at empty space, and we can only see basically what light brings to us. So, you look out there and you see all these stars, you see these little bright points, and you build a telescope and you make them stronger and stronger and more advanced, and you can see further and further and wider and clearer and clearer. But, it's still only giving you basically a view of what you're looking at. It's not actually, being able to register any other type of data. So with the advent of radio telescopes, and we really changed our ability to look at the stars. Now what we began to see was in between these places, in the dark spots, where we considered everything just to be completely nothing. It was all just black vacuum of space. Nothing existed. 99.9% empty space. So we hear all this stuff that comes from this side of the fence. We then all of a sudden started seeing these amazing, beautiful gas, nebulas, and these huge upward development. I mean, it looks like something out of a dream. It doesn't even make sense. And so, cosmology really had a hard time describing what this stuff was. And through the research, we've realized this stuff is plasma. This is all electrified gas that is coming from some source that we're kind of at odds of figuring out where this stuff is coming from and how it behaves and what it's doing. But what we do know is that 99.9% of what we are looking at has this plasma. So it went from being this lifeless, dark, nothingness universe to this bright, electrified, anything goes type of potential. And through the work of guys like Hans Alfvén, who did research on space plasma in the 1970s, and
he was the originator.
You had Christian Birkeland, who kind of started looking further into it, and Irving Langer, and then the amazing Emanuel Velikovsky, who actually has a letter to Einstein. Einstein responded to him and said, "Man, you really screwed us up. I can't
prove you wrong."
Yeah, I can't prove you wrong. And I also, you've really kind of divided the fence on cosmology. And so it since then has yet to even be disproven, some of the ideas that have come out of Velikovsky and some of these guys. So what we've come to understand is that you have this expanse of plasma, of this electrified gas that has certain densities that string together and connect all things. And so we have these things called Birkeland currents that are, and they're found in Earth's aurora. So, we see them even on planet Earth. These are things that we encounter on the planet as well. But we see these things stringing millions of light years, and connecting things, and stars are connected to the galaxy and other stars, and planets are connected to the stars that are around them. And so you end up having this beautiful kind of picture of space being all connected electrically, and everything is all intertwined, and it's all interacting. And it really kind of changes the entire view of what we are. When we look at our own bodies, we look at our cell structures, and we keep going down into our atomic structures. When we blow an atom up, the center of the atom becomes the size of a basketball. The closest electron particles is football fields away. And we now know that that's not empty space in between those two things, that is plasma, So even in our own constructs and everything around us and everything that is on the planet at base has this kind of this potential, this electrical plasma that is kind of connecting all things. So it really makes a huge change in our perspective about what other implications this brings us to think about, whether our thoughts are connected, whether we can communicate with other, biology on the planet, things like that. So it's an amazing thing to look into. I highly recommend people reading the research behind it, and definitely go to the Thunderbolts project, because these guys are pumping out some very easily digestible stuff that it'll surprise you if you look into it. So amazing stuff. It's electrifying. So
shocking, yes.
Shocking.
Yeah, we can't use that one enough. So what you say kind of echoes with my belief, maybe not belief, but my understanding of what it's all about. And the connectivity is a really important thing for me, because I see like mycelium and neural synapses in a brain. Everything's fractally like that. It's all part of the same thing. So I think electric universe theory gives us a lot of hope for the fact that we may be part of a larger sentient being, or a larger sentient organized structure of some kind. It's not just for me, and understanding electricity and all. It's kind of a spiritual thing, and maybe not a search for God, but for some it might be. That's the way I see it. But the connectivity, I think, is of utmost importance, and the instantaneous nature of the transmission of knowledge and information with electricity and plasma. It's being done here. Why can't it be done in nature? It's basically like we're mimicking nature, when we do it. So that's where I think the importance comes in, is understanding that it may not be the whole, all-encompassing theory that answers everything, that everyone's looking for. But it's really definitely going to be a big part of it, I think, when, it really comes down to where people start to understand this stuff exponentially. And each year it just gets more and more clear to everyone. So that's where I like to look at it. It's sort of a lot of hope. It's real interesting now, but the future is amazing for it. So I know you mentioned Thunderbolts. We're going to put that link in the description to Thunderbolts website, and there's a lot of great stuff on there. There's pictures and everything. It's got something for everybody. But we'll link that through the Ancient Amnesia website, and you can go get a couple links on there to make it easy for you. I guess I would have to say, as far as the spirituality and maybe the connectivity of it. Do you think people might have known about all this in the past, Josh? Do you think this was something that has been understood by previous civilizations, this, connectivity as far as electrical in nature?
Absolutely. I mean, we use these terms, he charged me, or I'm zapped.
Right.
We use a lot of these terms. We understand that I'm wired, right? Yeah. We use those terms because that's how we feel. The power within us, the things that are the thing that's beating in our hearts, that's stuff that's powering our cells. This is our power. This is how we stay alive. And this force is something that we have yet to really dig into. I think the ancients probably knew. I think some cultures probably knew more about it than we did. We've had shows on ancient electricity and how they potentially were using that. And they were probably finding it in a lot easier ways. And they never did anything without venerating it because they understood the source of it. And they saw it, like you said, as something very spiritual, and you did say something to me one time that made a lot of sense with it is that no matter what we use electricity for is to transfer information. So if there's information, then there has to be kind of, some intelligence, I believe, behind it, or
Sure.
there has to be,
Of course.
a source of information comes from intelligence. It has to have some sense of construct that is taking something and adding to it and powering it up. So I see this as something that is in a sense sentient, or it has some type of intellectual qualities to it. I don't need to put any kind of overarching mythology on that. I just think that it's something that that we have in mythology kind of represented as gods, as forces, much like Zeus with his thunderbolts. We look at some of the ancient gods, and we know that they were venerated with the power of lightning. And we look at Tesla's work. Tesla's saying it's everywhere.
Yeah.
He's just
Yeah.
picking it up out of the air. There's a lot of information. Walter Russell talks about everything being electric and full of light. And so I think that there's a huge spiritual connection to that. I think that you're definitely in that same category. And I think that's what the EU theory does. One of the best things it does is it's kind of taking mythology, and it's taking spirituality and some of the concepts that science tends to kind of stray away from, or try to hide from, or even kind of block some data coming in because they feel like it's just too scary or hot to handle. But I think that what this does is it kind of synergizes some of these things and makes them a little bit more digestible for people that are more science-minded, more rational-minded, because they go, well, if everything's connected through a plasma, then we are kind of all connected in a way. And if our cells are powered by this stuff, then there's no reason to think that we can't communicate via these electrical currents in some way, or we may already be doing that. So that, the idea of us having an aura, or the idea of us, being able to, zap people or transfer energy or take energy. We've heard about energy vampires, people that are social and they drain you and these kind of things. Are we talking about electricity here? Are we talking about plasma? What are we talking about when we're saying these things? Because it seems to me that if you're feeling them and they're a collective thing that we all understand and we all agree that is happening, there's a science behind it that we have yet to discover. And I think that this is a piece of that pie. I think this gets us one step closer to some of these more rational ideas on how this can make sense in a scientific sense. So yeah, I think, guys, you should definitely go to Thunderbolts, like Dave said. Check out the work of Emmanuel Velikovsky. I mean, if there's a giant in the field, I've read that they have.
Collision was one of the most amazing books I ever read, and still sticks in my head. And someone today I was talking about the subject on Facebook with a fellow named Greg. He brought it up. He says, "Oh man, if you haven't read Worlds in Collision, you have to read that." And I was like, "Oh yeah, one of my favorite books." And it's like, oh my God, it's you start to realize how many other people have read these books and must be having the same thoughts that we're having.
Absolutely.
They must be thinking the same thing. Is what the hell, and why are we stuck on this? And yeah, that's what really interests me is the fact that there's other people that have all these same ideas or similar, views of what's going on. And, they're just reaching out to find someone to talk to about it and, get that last little piece of information, that they might put in their puzzle that might help them out because, I got a lot of puzzles that are almost finished or half finished and, I don't have room to put them all, but it sure would be nice to get a piece of a puzzle every now and then, and finish one up.
Yeah.
So, we may not finish it up, but we can talk about it a lot and we can come up with, ideas that make a lot of sense. One thing you said was, you mentioned in the past, seeing this, the people that would have just been in touch with this, what we're just talking about. I picture some of the stuff that goes on in the sky, like the Aurora Borealis, the sprites and the elves, and I'm going to post links to a website that actually has a great, video on there that you can watch that explains what they are and how they occur and, why they happen so close to Earth. But it really would make sense to me that if we're seeing this stuff today, they were seeing it, 12,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, and without ambient light, no cities, no light, just blocking out our view of the stars. What were they seeing, man? Were they seeing like whole nebulas? I mean, were they seeing, just galaxies that were so distant that we can't see them now, even if we're out to sea on a ship with no lights? They had to think these are gods, or these are, powerful beings in the sky. And a lot of the Hopi stuff, and the stuff out from the Anasazis and the southwestern Indians, I think they were probably the last to lose their ambient light, out there. And it really was a strong part of their history. Whereas they saw this stuff going on in the sky, because you look at some of the Hopi drawings of their beings, they kind of look like sprites. They have a head and shoulders, and then the body just sort of, forms into spikes of energy. Of course, all the Thunderbolt stuff, with all the different symbols that are all over rocks and drawn all around the world that look like plasma formations in a laboratory. And I've seen them. I can tell you, I've seen several of those, being done. And there's a couple I'd like to, try to duplicate at some point. But yeah, to me, it would have to be that, all this stuff is also going to give us another option for what these people thought of as God, or what these people thought of as their spiritual being that was watching them from the sky. And that's where electricity is a big deal, because it's an electrical universe. If you consider that what you might call God is electricity, because it's the flow of endless information, and it doesn't care who shares it. You're going to get it. And it's just like when you reach and touch a bare wire, you're going to get it, man. So what's going to happen? It's electricity. It's kind of predictable, but it's very unpredictable. So I think the ancients probably had a really big connection to the shapes and the forms that they saw in the sky. And the Aurora Borealis, I mean, it's just, we look at it now and we're just dumbfounded, in this day and age of, modern artwork and stuff that, nothing surprises us. You go up there and the first time you see that, you just stare at it and you're speechless. You can't even describe it to the person next to you because they're speechless. And even if you did talk, they wouldn't hear you because they're staring at it, So yeah, that's what tells me there's something else to it besides the mechanical aspect and the functional aspect. And, but there is a place for that. There's a place for all that science, and there's a place for the people that are good at it. Another thing, the aspect that I look at is we really see it when we work with transformers. You've got a primary and you've got a secondary, and you just bring them together and you pulse one with a cycling voltage, and the other one picks it up. And you can take it out and you can amplify it, do whatever you want with it. You can step it up in voltage. You can step it down in voltage. But there's nothing in between. You can just wave your hand in between these two, and you don't get electrocuted, but there's electricity traveling through there. And that's just in a room where there's no gas or anything. When you begin to introduce a plasma and different gases, that's like what neon is, and that's what fascinates me, is that it can go right through you and not do a thing to you. But when you concentrate that electricity in a conductor, as it's moving in a spiral through that conductor, and then it hits you, and your body, being an electrical thing that's mostly water, it's bam, it's conductivity, and you get the shit shocked out of you, but you can put your hand in the middle of an inductor, or a transformer set up with a primary and a secondary, and not feel a thing. You can hear it running with the signal generator, and you can hear your little amplifier you had to build to do it running, but there's nothing there. So that's what tells me that it also nurtures what keeps it alive.
When you're talking about you were talking about the ancients and what they saw in the sky, and you have to think, I mean, these even in science, we say that we're made of star stuff, so the idea of us coming from the cosmos is not something that's, weird to anybody. I think we all realize we're in space, we're embedded in space. So when we're up there and we're looking at these kind of like structures that these ancients probably saw because there was no light pollution, they were just looking at things greater than themselves. They were looking at something that they can only identify as the source of creation, something that is, so magnificent and grand and vast. I mean, it's like the most amazing painting, and it changes, and it has these different colors and stuff. So it is literally probably the original source of all of our imaginative, mythology, and we turned these things into ideas that became, gods, and the forces became gods, and those forces, they interact. When we look at the planet, the solar system, we know that things have been hit. We know that Mars has been, pummeled, and that Saturn and Jupiter get pummeled, and we've actually videotaped these things happen, and we've seen things hit our moon. So this idea that we're just kind of floating around all hunky-dory and nothing ever changes it's just not true. I mean, and no one believes that in any
Right.
cosmology anyway. So
Right. Of course.
you need to understand that, just like on the Earth, the continents drift and they change shape. And the same thing happens on a solar level where we have planets colliding, we have different planets closer, we have potential planets crossing each other, and these currents can then, zap the planets and scar the planets. I mean, all of these things are potentials. And if humans have been here for hundreds of thousands of years, I mean, these events, are well within those frameworks of time that they can happen and we can record them. It just makes sense that a cave in one part of the world can have the exact same drawing as a plasma formation, is somebody on the other side of the entire globe with no connection back in the early Paleolithic times. So, there has to be some kind of common source, and it obviously would make sense if it was just up in the sky where you could look at it. In the same sense that all cultures draw the sun, and all cultures, depict the moon, and all cultures depict everything else, like the constellations that are up there. So, we have a lot of evidence in the mythological realm that this stuff was things that they saw, and that it was things that they were looking at, and it was a common thing. And I just think it makes it more fantastical. It just makes everything seem so much more amazing. It gives
Yeah, sure it does.
it gives validation to all of these cultures, and it makes everything so much more alive and electrifying. So so yeah, I think you're right, and we don't really know. Electricity is still, even on Earth, a very kind of mysterious thing, and we're still learning how to harness it better and to use it easier,
Right.
and to power things easier with it. So we have very far from figuring this stuff out, and this is just a really good piece that kind of really pulls a lot of things together, makes things make a lot more sense on a simple level. And I think it's been ignored for a while, and I think we're finally getting somewhere with it, where we can turn the tide and start going, wow, like, what does this mean if this is true? And if it is true, how do we then change our science to then start tampering with new ideas with these forces, and how we can use them, and, obtain them and store them, and whatever else we can do with them. So this is really exciting stuff.
Yep, it is. And there is a scientific bent to it for a lot of people who, might want to think like we do and think spiritually, and, think, how does it affect everyone in their minds and the psychology? I know I personally work with dichroic glass, and dichroic glass is a glass that's coated with mineral oxides and different types of metal. They're vapor deposition. So it's basically coated in a vacuum. The metal is ignited and adheres to the glass, and then you take the glass and you cut it and fire it. There's a process called sputtering. Sputtering is basically where you either erode the surface with an electrical beam of some kind, or you actually deposit materials in a random pattern on something until it's coated, like powder coating. And there's a lot of scientific processes that are similar to what's going on in space. You would think, okay, a sputtering makes sense, because you're taking all these little things that are floating around that, are so minuscule and tiny, and making planets and celestial bodies out of them, using electricity. And it's really kind of the same thing. You're taking elements and you're depositing them by using plasma in a vacuum with electricity. And you're taking one element and putting it on at a different temperature or voltage, and everything is done specific to the elements. And space already knows that. Space knows exactly what it takes to put magnesium into the core of a planet. It knows exactly what it takes to deposit iron here or whatever. It's just like this natural thing that happens. And I think it's all driven by electricity. I think electricity is sort of the framework that determines where the elements are going to go. It's also probably determined by weight, or some resistance to gravity that things have. But I think electricity sort of builds the framework for the universe, and the matter attaches to it. And it's an intelligent framework. It's a sentient framework. So it's always communicating with what created it or what sent it to happen. But when you look at it on Earth, we have vapor deposition and sputtering. These are things that people have just, gone in their labs and done crazy stuff, electrocuted the crap out of their cat or whatever, but they figured it out, and
Yeah.
we're sort of discovering this, this mysticism, that surrounds all these things that the ancients all knew. So many of the ancients knew all this stuff, and we're just figuring it out.
Yeah.
but that's what's
Yeah.
fascinating to me, and
Yeah.
and the real science behind it, because it basically has to come down to science. The church isn't going to figure out the electric universe theory for us, so
Yeah. Right.
we're going to have to depend on the scientists of NASA and whoever,
Yeah.
the ones that we pay for with our tax dollars. I would have to say the other one that comes in that some people might question as far as being science and, maybe not being so factual is gravity.
Hmm.
Where does electricity play into gravity? I mean, is electricity causing gravity? Is gravity causing electricity?
Yeah.
Gravity being the weaker force, the nuclear force being much stronger. The way I would see it is, everything flows through a conductor, whether it's a plasma or a solid or a liquid. Whatever it is, the electricity is flowing through. And do you think that as the electricity flows through that it would naturally just sort of pull it along or pull the mass along with it?
It kind of reminds me of like magnetism. Like you can't have that without an electrical input. Like,
Right, of course, yeah. With
so,
any electricity,
it's more like an activator, right? It's like the electricity is what's powering the other forces.
yeah. When you wave magnets together, you just wave them by each other, you're creating electrical forces.
Right,
Yeah.
and so
Called the lens force or whatever, a lens effect, where you drop the magnet through the copper pipe,
right,
and it slows down. It's like,
right.
that's a trick.
Yeah, so I think it's what's powering everything. When we talk about on the
Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that, by the way. I don't know.
Yeah,
The lens.
this
lens
is this
effect or something.
yeah. No, I would say that when you think about Kundalini forces and Chi forces and things like that, I don't think any of those yogi masters would say that electricity has no involvement in that process. I think that that may be the base of it all. I mean, that may be, obviously it's power, right? It's energy. It's what things move with. It's how we move things. It's how we energize everything. So I would say that anything else would kind of come secondary, and gravity would, to me, be
Sure.
more of an output of something else that's based in that kind of electrical, plasma type of template.
What was it? Walter Russell called it desire. Everything has a desire to return.
Yeah, and that actually, yeah.
And Thomas Townsend Brown had said, positive chases negative. Return, return, return was his statement in one of his books or one of his pamphlets that he wrote. And I thought that's pretty cool because, you really think about it, you got one chasing the other, and it's perpetual. It doesn't stop,
Right.
And a battery doesn't really go dead. It just stops providing the potential that you need to do the job and the work that you needed to do. There's still elements in there and it's still doing the exact same thing. It's just not doing it in such a dense form, So,
right.
Guys that talked about this stuff, that, they were aware of it. They were aware that it had some effect on gravity because T.T. Brown was a big guy with gravity, and he came up with, all these inventions to, show how a capacitor would move when it was hit with high voltages, and he also would hang these things from a spinning, like a tower, and just, charge them up with 40,000 volts and hit them, and the thing would just start spinning around.
Right.
It was like the thing was just chasing itself. It had this motive force that the electricity created gravity. Basically, it moved things.
Right.
But,
that's kind of where I would think that would be the outcome. And exactly what you said with with the if you look at Masaru Emoto's work with the water molecules too. I mean, when you talk about intent, you talk about
how to freeze different.
How do we impose any type of energy onto something else that's kind of we obviously we're interconnected with all things. So
Sure.
What is intent and how does that have to do with electricity and then Walter Russell has this idea of still magnetic light, and what is light? Well, we talk about light. Natural light comes from the sun. Well, the electric universe theory is proposing that the sun is being powered through filaments that are connecting to the central galaxy. So, or other stars, and they're connected. So if that means the sun is a potentially electric creation, maybe like a electrical gas that's kind of being fed instead of burning out. If we hold that theory is true, then light is electric, and the relationship between light and electricity is becoming a little bit more intertwined. And when Walter Russell was communicating with Tesla on this. Tesla, you know, claimed he was one of the smartest men on the planet, and he was years ahead of his time. And so, you know,
They
there's
really
a lot
liked
of
him, huh?
you really liked him. So you have the master of electricity and the master of light, and they're both saying,
Yeah.
you're right on, right? So there's
Yeah.
a connection there. There's a connection between light and electricity in this plasma and this electric universe theory. So it really wraps a lot of things around, and I think the best thing we can do is to try to find different points of research that connect the dots, get out there and find all of the different angles that we can get in on this, and try to get a bigger understanding. And that's what the Thunderbolts Project is doing. So go check them out, help them out. You know, we're going to post a lot of their videos. We have a lot of the videos on our site.
Oh yeah.
Posting tons of things on the page that just kind of help us. And people like Greg Hummel, we have a few other guys that are really smart on this stuff. Please send
chip
us
in, guys. Yeah, let's
send
hear
us
you.
information. We may even tap you on the shoulder and ask if you want.
I can add 100 people on Zoom. I can actually add 100 people on here. We can have a meeting with 100 different people if we wanted to. I'd love to hear from some of these members, because you got some fascinating people in the group. You know, I mean, just, you know, people that they just kind of lay low and check stuff out, but when they comment, it's very lucid and it makes a lot of sense, and it shows that they're passionate about it. So yeah, I think that's a great idea, Josh. Yeah,
that's the idea. We're gonna throw some ideas out here. We're gonna talk about them. We're gonna talk about what we know about them, and then our knowledge is gonna kind of stop until we further research it. And the best thing we can do is to hear from you guys and let us know what you know, because you know some things we don't. And then we can, you know, feed each other this information and get up to speed faster, and then potentially have somebody on the show and see what they think about it. You know, this is a community experience. So, you know, I hope everybody got stimulated electrically through this conversation, and that it was fun. This was a request. You know, you guys said talk about it, so we've got your request lined up. Let us know what else you want to hear about, because we're going to just basically line that stuff up on the show. And some of this stuff we're really smart about, some of it we're not. And so when we
help us out here, man, we're
not. We research and we find out and we learn a lot. So this is a fun process, and just jump in. The water's warm.
Well, basically the way I see it is we're going to get back on the solar light ship here, man. And we're going to say, you know, thanks a lot, everybody who joined us here, because Josh and I have been talking about this, and we put a lot of hours in just to come up with this short little amount of content. We really love what we do, and you know, it might be a little spacey at times, but that's okay, because we're spacey too, right, Josh? So, you know, we can handle that. But yeah, we're going to get back on the light ship here, and you know, see if we can go find out some answers to our mysteries here. So thanks for listening to podcast number 2. This is the second podcast of the Ancient Amnesia podcast series, and hopefully in a couple of years we'll be talking about podcast 300 or 400. And we hope a lot of people get involved, and you know, don't ever hesitate to give us your information if you want to come on here and talk with us about it. We've got the software set up where you guys can call in, you can chat, you can join in the whole podcast. You know, if it works out, like Josh said, you know, we'd really appreciate it, because you learn from the people around you. You know, you're not going to sit in your little microcosm and you know, just absorb knowledge. You know, you got to tap in, you got to hook up into the circuit, and you got to throw that breaker, and you got to learn about this stuff. So thanks for being here, guys. We really appreciate it. I
appreciate it, guys. You guys have a good one. Nice, dude. I think it went well.
Yeah, that was great.